Professional wrestling is built upon conventional wisdoms. Some are agreeable, while others, like saying Sid Yuti was a bad wrestler or Inokiism was bad, are heinous and deserve to be disregarded outright. But one that will be unanimously agreed upon is that everyone loves an athletic big man. And to bookers, a phrase I will borrow from one Jim Ross, athletic big men draw money. And while the financial aspect of professional wrestling has never been a subject that has ever been interesting to me, I am in support of the idea of underrated wrestlers getting their due. And of the meager amount of monsters AEW has at their disposal, one look at Brody King and you know he's a beast of a different species. Towering at 6'5" and 285 pounds, with as much lineage as the name Brody carries with it in wrestling, he more than holds up his share of intimidating intensity and wild man chaos. Be it throwing chops that could down redwoods, or hurling his massive frame with the reckless abandon of a man half his size. Simply put, violence isn't just an act Brody King commits, it's a way of life. And he lives life to its fullest. However, for as much exposure Brody has gotten on AEW, what with being Trios champions with the House of Black, feuding with Darby Allin, or his 2 appearances in the Continental Classic, it still feels like far too many people have been sleeping on the big man, and how much he still has to offer for AEW. In the 10 years Brody King has been barking and stomping around the wrestling scene, his resume reads of truly impressive encounters from some of the best wrestlers in the world from a bevy of promotions, from the various indies to Pro Wrestling Guerrilla to Ring of Honor, New Japan, and of course his current home promotion of AEW. I want today's video to be a primer of the talents Brody King brings to the table, with his best being brought out by some of the most beloved talents in the business over a variety of promotions, and who knows, maybe after you watch this video, those signature barks Brody elicits on Dynamite and Collision get a little louder the more of you guys join in unison as he becomes one of your favorite guys on the roster. He's one of mine. But now, it's time to enter the Tattoo Titan, the Hardcore Hulk, the Leviathan from LA, God's Hate's very own, number 1 in violence, Big Bad Brody King. Oh!
We're number 1 in violence.
I think the important thing to know about professional wrestling is that it doesn't owe you anything. You have to give all of yourself if you want to be any kind of successful in this business. You have to give your body, you have to give your mind, you have to give your life to professional wrestling. And that's a lot to ask to somebody. If you give everything to professional wrestling, at some point, it's going to give back.
Darby Allin is the greatest opponent Brody King has ever faced. It's important that I state this objective truth outright because any discussion of Brody King's career is not only incomplete, but impossible without him. Darby Allin has built and perfected his own genre of match around him dying horribly to opponents whom either A, are much bigger than him, or B, are known for having disgusting offense. Good to know, Brody King fits both criteria. Their dynamic is as follows. Brody treats Darby like a Rottweiler treats a squeaky toy, and Darby responds by showing the world that his bones only respond to the rules of Grand Theft Auto ragdoll physics. Truly, I am spoiled for choice when it comes to picking a match to recommend for you, but I wanted to go a bit off the beaten path for something truly unique between the two in the environment of Suburban Fight Pro. A lot of what carries this match is the intimate, borderline claustrophobic atmosphere. Everything from the way it's shot to the way both King and Allen have to maneuver around the cramped music venue feels so dangerous, and the threat of something going wrong hovers like a miasma throughout the match. Luckily, both King and Allen construct the match by getting as much creativity out of their environment to enact the most sick as hell spots they can come up with. Acid drops off the stage onto Brody King's back? Hell yeah. Brody dragging Darby Allin's back across the bar? Hell yeah! Darby finding a mint scooter somewhere, somehow, and cruising at full speed into a lariat from Brody King. Hell fucking yeah. Throw in some nasty chops by Brody and Darby's scrappy underdog offense, and it's a recipe for something really enjoyable. And at only 8 minutes, it's a breezy, action-packed sprint that's all killer, no room for filler. Sometimes, matches rule not because there's any thoughtful psychology or intricate details, they can rule by appealing to the most simple of desires. And the rivalry between Darby Allin and Brody King live up to how simple and true wrestling can be. Sometimes I just want to see a small man hurl himself full speed at a man much larger than him and see the larger man Skyrim giant his ass into the next area code. But for Brody King, it's easy to throw his weight around when he's facing someone smaller than him. How does Brody fare when it's time for him to pick on someone his own size? As an independent talent, 2018 was Brody King's coming out year. From MLW to Defy to Ring of Honor to GCW, this is where he rubs up against some of the biggest and most beloved acts on the scene. But in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, no one is bigger than Der Ring General Volta, aka Gunther, in which Brody King finds himself in a genuinely unique situation on two fronts. One, he gets to be the hometown hero with the opportunity to win the big one in his home state of California. And two, he has to work underneath against someone bigger and more imposing than himself. Now, while I'm not trying to paint this match as a Andre Hansen matchup, Walter is obviously not 7 feet 500 pounds, but the discrepancy is noticeable enough that it makes Walter the more imposing figure. Luckily, this isn't hard for Walter, being one of the great bully heels of his generation. But Brody does manage to make the role of the babyface fighting from underneath work in his favor, starting by using his superior athleticism to duck and weave the more devastating offense of Walter, as well as how he sells his neck as it becomes the focal point of Walter as the Austrian anomaly endeavors to pound and grind away at his neck. Which is extra heelish towards a man like Brody because he really needs that neck to enjoy headbanging to satisfaction as the death of desire. King's selling on his end is implemented in a manner that adds an extra layer of drama and intrigue to the match, to see how far Brody King can be pushed past the pain against a man who loves inflicting it. As everything from clubbing blows to neck breakers, neck cranks, and all around just dropping him on his head all look painful and wear Big Bad Brody down. Even selling the damage done by not being able to follow up on a successful suplex or being able to hold pressure on his neck after executing a German suplex. All help translate a sense of damage over how much Walter has effectively elicited pain and the toll it is taking. Speaking of pain, let's not act like this match isn't above indulging into everyone's favorite lizard brain trope in wrestling. Say it with me. And I mean, these two just lay that shit in. Walter is giving Brody the full Walter. letting those famous frying pans and forearms fly with a kind of rifle shot sound that reverberates louder than any uncomfortable wince or groan the Global Theater faithful could utter. But Brody obliges to give it back to Walter twofold, standing and trading with Dwayne General with his own skin-peeling chops, leading to really exciting comebacks from Brody, including laying it all on the line with a truly massive tope that lays both men out for nearly the whole 20 count, that gives way to the crowd truly believing in Brody as what is a general to a king. But Walter, being far more experienced and hardened than Brody, has been through his own fair share of slugfests and weathers the storm to find the smallest opening to cut Brody down with a single lariat, and follows this up by using Brody's weakened neck as a target to drop Brody with a piledriver to retain the PWG World title. On the surface, this match is just a good old-fashioned hoss fight, with both men throwing the heaviest artillery they can at each other till the other falls down, but uniquely held together by a genuine neck-selling performance by Brody that proves that he can be a truly functional seller when put into a position where he needs to be vulnerable against an opponent more laser-focused on a technical level or more brutal than him. And having someone like Walter who is both truly brings that quality out in Brody King. This match also proves that while Brody may not be the most technical or detail-oriented wrestler in the world, he'll do anything to show up to fight and gut out a performance despite the immense pain he receives, to dish it out in a way his opponent won't soon forget, or more appropriately, feel the next morning. On this night, against a man who was too big, too strong, and too resilient, Brody King, for the first time in his life, was but number 2 in violence. Man, everyone's a king till real royalty shows up. This match is an extension of what Brody's match against Walter was in terms of goals. Test Brody King's toughness against a man whose hands are heavier than a Morbid Angel riff and see if he's got what it takes to stand and trade with them. Luckily, Brody's hands are heavy enough to exchange with the King's road's strongest soldier. For as hard as Eddie hits Brody, Brody is able to hit back just as hard, if not harder, in the way Eddie sells for Brody's offense compared to how Brody sells for Eddie. Brody registers pain for sure, but for Brody's character, it comes across more as tanking the shots, whereas Eddie visualizes the pain by trying to walk it off and be tough about it. Another really great detail of this match is how Eddie sells for the damage he inflicts and what is inflicted upon him, including taking a moment to get his bearings after delivering a massive headbutt, or later in the match going in for another chop after eating an elbow from King, only to stumble backwards, reeling from the damage. Visually, Eddie does a great job here at being able to let the tough guy bravado break as his emotions overtake him, as over and over again he fails to pin the 818 abomination. Moments where victory feels like it's at Eddie's grasp come not from him being the better brawler, but from all these little shortcuts and moments of desperation, including suckering Brody King in for a jawbreaker into swinging neckbreaker near fall, and the eye poke into a Uranagi near fall. And when these attempts fail, the frustration visualizes themselves into bitter disbelief and a horrifying realization. Brody King might just be the tougher man. I'm talking a lot about Eddie here, despite this not being a video about him, but it really is important these narrative beats get set up, as Kingston might be writing some good music, but Brody has to perform it. Any moment the facade of the Mad King falters, Brody's able to overtake Eddie, where any moment of weakness or stalling from Kingston results in Brody making him pay by leathering Eddie with his own combustible chops, clubbing lariats, and a hellacious boss man slam that stumble and flatten Kingston. The more the match goes on, the more Brody figures out the only way to beat Eddie is to outlast him. Eddie is hard, but Brody is harder. I particularly like the finish, where Eddie came out of the gate swinging, trying to overwhelm Brody in the beginning. It's the latter, who was able to play Eddie's game more effectively simply by using his superior size and power to merely outlast Yonkers' favorite son, hitting a string of offense in succession to finally get the 3 on Eddie Kingston. For only 9 minutes long, this helped build Brody King's resume as someone who can stand and trade with the legitimately toughest in the business and not look weak doing so. It's an extremely effective battle of wills, where both men try to throw as much and as hard as the other man is willing to take, where one stands strong while the other slowly reveals the cracks. Eddie doesn't lose here because he was the worst wrestler. On the contrary, he has the experience on top of the violence that could effectively put Brody King away, but his own emotions and underestimating of Brody's own toughness and will to fight revealed a desperate frustration, where his emotions overtook his resolve. And Brody, while stepping up to every bit of Kingston's furious attack with his own, it was only a matter of time before Eddie fell before the juggernaut that is Brody King, and proved if you come swing at the king, you better not miss. My friends, this one is called Bro Him. Biff Busick's all too brief stint down the independents in 2022 gave us some real gems across a multitude of promotions, most specifically against the likes of Slade in Beyond Wrestling and Jon Moxley in GCW. But under the radar for most, he makes a pit stop in Circle 6 against a much more fleshed out, seasoned, and newly signed by AEW monster in Brody King. Now, you're probably looking at this match and can already hear what it's going to be like, but what keeps the match from being completely mindless is the dynamic at play. Against Busick, King is really great at feeling and presenting himself like a monster against a much smaller but scrappy Busick. In the first act of the match, due to his superior size and strength, Brody is able to reverse and fight his way out of every hold Busick throws at him, be it a knuckle lock that he turns into an overhead suplex, or reversing an underhook maneuver into a modified vertebraker. Everything Busick does feels ineffectual compared to the power and presence of King. Try to wrestle him and he'll break free. Try and knock him down, he stands unfazed. And this monstrous presence extends into his offense as well, as after Busick familiarizes his palm with Brody's chest with a truly thunderous chop, Brody pillar to post pounds the WWE stink out of Busick on the outside. Brody feels like such a force here. He's an anomalous puzzle physically that drives Busick to become more desperate and play his strategy with a lot more focus. And once that opportunity presents itself, Busick makes the absolute most out of it. Following Brody testing his chop hand against the side of the ring post, Busick finally gains the opening he needs to use Brody's injured hand as a focus for his offense. Brody King once again reveals how much of a good seller he can be in this control segment. An important quality of being a monster is the ability to present weakness when the opportunity calls for it, and Brody is more than capable here of showing weakness and selling an injured limb effectively. And even if the limb selling isn't perfect, I personally wish it was more consistent, especially down the latter end of the match. It does give an extra layer to it that prevents the match from being completely one-dimensional. And Brody's storytelling with the hand isn't just limited to the moments where he's registering pain from his hand getting manipulated and mangled, but in the way he creates space. There's a moment in the match where after getting his fingers snapped and hands slammed against the apron, just hooves Busick into the audience, and rather than pursue or drag him back into the ring, he tries to get Busick as far away from him as possible, utilizing the full 20 count to get as much feeling back into his hand as he can, knowing that Busick's more technical proclivities are going to be the sole focus of his attack. And once Busick is on the attack, he is malicious. It's teased earlier during the knuckle lock what his plan of attack was, but now commits to bending and twisting at the Great Bear Paw to elicit bellows of pain from the big man. But it's not just the way Busick works the hand as a means of softening it up for a submission like most wrestlers do. He uses the hand to fully manipulate Brody down to his size, where any attempt for Brody to gain a vertical base and retaliate is responded to by shooting pain straight down his hand for Busick to do whatever he wants. And Busick really wants to get some farm quality hamburger from Brody's chest by unloading some truly skin peeling chops here, begging the behemoth to get up only to knock him back down. But if you know anything about the former Oni Lorcan, he lays in some absolutely scream-worthy slaps here that absolutely reduce Brody King's taste buds to atoms. Every strike he throws at Brody has intent and purpose behind it. They're so fast and so brutal, constantly battering and blasting Brody down with slaps, uppercuts, and chops that all sound so satisfying and crisp as he slowly but surely brings the California Redwood down, as each successful attempt brings him closer and closer down to the mat. This offense, of course, is made even more satisfying by the way Brody elicits his quote-unquote tree selling, making every attempt feel so much more believable, the way he clings to the ropes for safe harbor being the only thing saving him from Busick's onslaught. But like I mentioned earlier, all Brody needs is one equalizer to snuff out Busick's fire, and has some real guillotines for biceps, all but decapitating and turning Busick inside out with those brutal lariats, one of which leads to a decisive Gonzo bomb for the 3 count, welcoming the Boston Battler back to the Indies, and maybe making Biff reconsider that decision. This match just rocks. Real Incredible Hulk vs. Wolverine vibes here, with 2 incredibly angry men, where one is a monster too big and too strong to be felled, and a comparatively smaller man too angry and too wild to quit. All layered with some effective limb targeting and selling that, while I wish was more consistent, doesn't take away too much from how damn hard-hitting it is. Both men really just leather the hell out of each other and drop each other with such force that it all feels and sounds genuine. Busick himself fights like he has something to prove to the indie scene at large, being free from the WWE system, and Brody, who once again has to stand his ground against a beloved legend of the indie scene, and never once feels out of place, dishing it out and more than taking it in the process. In the eternal struggle between the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, Brody King answers this question, bruised and beaten, but standing immovable. In truth, it's impossible for anyone to have a bad match with Bryan Danielson. But I think Danielson's natural ability to bring out an opponent's greatest qualities is where we see Brody at his absolute best as a monster here. The Continental Classic in 2023 was a great showcase for Brody's offense as devastating. And here, he smothers Dragon with his monstrous frame, tearing and ripping at Danielson's bandaged eye, even so much as full-force cannonballing his entire near 300-pound frame straight into Danielson's orbital bone. As I've mentioned with previous Brody matches in this video, he's great at brawling on the outside, constantly on the attack and using the real estate of the ringside area to inflict brutal throws into the guardrail, and doing his best impression of a Great Dane, leaping onto your lap thinking he's a Yorkie. Good lord. This dominance also extends into segments where he works on Danielson's eye socket. It's so mean and so gross the way he tears and bludgeons at Dragon's face as blood drips from his brow, even scraping at the cut, licking up the blood like the savage he is. Everything Brody does on offense has intent and purpose behind it, never letting up for a moment, with Danielson's infamous selling speaking magnitudes towards how imposing Brody is on the attack, giving some truly inspired facials and physical selling to make that impact feel devastating. There's this visual after Brody hits the crossbody to the guardrail where the camera just focuses in on Bryan, visualizing the gears turning in his head as his broken body is reconsidering his choices and replanning his strategy in real time. But as violent and oppressive as Brody is, his confidence unfortunately lapses into cockiness and takes too much time to hit another crossbody to the guardrail and goes ribs first. Where Bryan, out of sheer desperation, launches his entire body at King with an apron knee, top rope dropkick, and running dropkick to the corner with such haste that it really puts over how serious Bryan is at taking Brody down. Hitting riskier and bigger offense means that he knows how violent Brody can get if this match goes into deep waters, and tries to end it as quick as he can with sheer volume. However, as we know from every match we've talked about, Brody is more than willing to take it as well as he can dish it out, and survives Bryan's comeback by crushing Danielson with a lariat from the top turnbuckle. Danielson's strategy going into this match is based around trying to chop the proverbial tree down with leg kicks, which, if you've seen my Vader Takata video, you know sucks. But what sucks even more is receiving them from one of the greatest kickers of all time. As is standard for Danielson, he lays his kicks in with such force and conviction that they land with a kind of sound as if a baseball bat was being thwacked against a side of beef. And Brody has plenty of beef. Danielson also shows a level of versatility in the way he works the leg that gives his attack more dimension, as it not only opens up the opportunity for Danielson to capitalize on submission-based offense like a half crab, but also to keep Brody grounded as to land his more famous Danielson stomps and hammer and anvil elbows. But like any good Overwatch player who mains Reinhardt or kept Barrett in their party for most of Final Fantasy VII, it's not about dishing out the damage, it's about receiving it. And Brody eats Danielson's hardest shots like I do Texas Roadhouse rolls, even kicking out of Danielson's patented Psycho knee to his shock, and by turning Danielson inside out with a King Kong-sized lariat. But remember, this is Bryan Danielson we're talking about, and if there's one thing that we know him for, is that no matter how much he gets punished, he makes miracles happen. And he commits to one by firing up with not one, not two, but 3 Busaiku knees for the 3 count, gaining 3 points in the Continental Classic over Brody King. This is, in my opinion, the best match Brody King has had in AEW that didn't involve hurling Darby Allin into the sun. So much is accomplished here to make Brody King feel so complete as a wrestler. Danielson being so willing to sell and make Brody look like a monster goes a long way, as his performance here really does shine in the way Danielson creates palpable disbelief in his own ability to stand against such a monster in Brody King. And the way Danielson strings together his offense is logical and has purpose in chopping Brody down to make his signature offense feel earned. But Brody is more than carrying his weight to belong with the GOAT. Every bit of offense Brody delivers is violent and deeply mean-spirited in his lack of regard for Danielson's injured eye. Digging and scratching at it with his cast hand, bashing it with his forearm against the announce table, and crushing it as he hurls his whole body against it. The violence he displays in this match goes from emotionless force of nature to sick madman that makes Brody this overwhelming force, unmoving and uncaring to what Danielson's physical state is, only delighting in his work when he has drawn blood. And like a shark when he smells it, goes for the kill. But on one hand, while Brody excels at being an unstoppable force of anger and annihilation, he's equally great at presenting weakness. Brody knows when to open up and let himself be brought down to his opponent's level without ever compromising his character, primarily in the way he sells the leg, but also in being so willing to crumble to Danielson and allow himself to tank so many shots, giving the American Dragon hope, knowing that at the right time, he only needs one good hit to even the playing field. It's such a precarious line to walk, being an imposing monster that can sell and be vulnerable at the right time, that Brody is arguably one of the best out there at doing so, which helps make Danielson's hope spots ever the more satisfying, and Danielson himself putting over how strong and impervious Brody is, by having to resort to the Busaiku knee so frequently as a desperate tactic to present a man truly out of options. At this point, We know that Brody is good. Hell, he can show signs of being great. But in the Continental Classic, he's not the GOAT. No one truly is. Sometimes we can only but brush up against greatness. But for Brody King, he didn't just brush up against greatness, he made it bleed. Brody King truly is one of the great underappreciated big men working in the industry. King's versatility in the ring makes him unique against other big men and monsters in professional wrestling. Be it the way he lays in his offense with room-reverberating chops and launching his own body with the reckless abandon of a man half his size, to the vulnerability he presents as someone who can be giving to an opponent without ever compromising his character. By the time of this video's release, I have no doubt that he's impressed a good few of you by being a part of the Continental Classic once more against a slew of AEW's best in the Gold League. But on top of that, I hope this video gives Brody the extra push he deserves to really show how great he can truly be if utilized in higher profile stories, and possibly with future singles gold, with all the skills at his disposal. Whether he does this while still being a part of the House of Black or on his own, time will tell. Going into 2025, I have no doubts that the road to greatness for Brody King will be hard. But to quote Big Bad Brody King himself,
life is hard, so be harder.